The silence was a lie. The stillness of our sprawling, minimalist home in the foothills of Boulder, Colorado, was an illusion. In my heart, I knew I was living in a glass house, every moment captured, every breath cataloged. It was a feeling that had settled over me like a cold dread, a phantom weight on my shoulders. The source of my unease was a small, unassuming black orb mounted to the wall just outside our front door. The Ring camera. My husband, Julian, a man whose artistic aspirations far exceeded his talent, had insisted on its installation years ago, claiming it was for security. But I knew the truth. It was a panopticon, a digital tether that logged my every coming and going. The hum of my electric car's engine as I left for work at dawn, the rustle of my designer coat as I opened the door, the quick conspiratorial wave to a trusted colleague before a late-night Uber ride, all meticulously documented, a perfectly compiled record of my existence. I am Alara, a senior art curator at the city's most prestigious gallery, a position of immense trust and responsibility that requires discretion and a meticulous eye for detail. I was in the middle of a project that could define my career, acquiring a highly sought-after but historically undervalued collection of forgotten modernist art. This was more than just a job. It was a personal mission, a passion project I was keeping a secret from Julian. He had always been a man of immense ego, his artistic failures a source of simmering resentment. I knew he would never understand the quiet, personal thrill of discovering a masterpiece, of finding beauty in the forgotten. So, I worked in silence. My every move a calculated risk, a delicate dance between my public and private lives. I was so careful, so certain I had covered my tracks. But what I didn't realize was that I wasn't just working in secret. I was leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for him to find. The small, encrypted files I stored on a thumb drive in my purse. The late-night emails I sent from a different email address with purposefully vague subject lines. Even the quiet conversations I had in the car before I turned on the engine. They were all deliberate. I was baiting him, waiting for him to make his move, to show his hand. Little did he know, his every action was a part of a larger, more calculated play. He had no idea that for months he wasn't the hunter. He was the prey. And he was walking right into a trap that I had been building for him since the day I realized he was a monster. The game was on, and he was completely unaware that I was playing with a full deck, while he was holding a handful of worthless cards. The stakes were higher than just a marriage. They were for my entire life and my future. And I was ready to play. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss out on more cases like this. Update 1. The unraveling. The first signs of the impending catastrophe were small, almost imperceptible, dismissed by my friends as mere marital quirks. Julian, a man whose artistic mind was prone to seeing patterns where none existed, started making offhand comments that felt too specific to be coincidental. "Another late night at the gallery, Alara?" he'd ask, his voice a casual blend of sarcasm and passive aggression. "The delivery guy must be wondering what treasures you're unearthing at this hour." I would brush it off, a nervous laugh masking the cold dread in my stomach. I was receiving confidential project files at odd hours to protect them from prying eyes at the gallery, a precaution my project lead and I had agreed upon. I thought I was being so smart, so discreet. The truth was far more sinister. Julian wasn't just guessing. He was using the Ring camera's logs and timestamps to piece together a narrative, a completely fabricated account of my life. He'd bring up a specific time I went out for an early morning jog, mentioning how unusually long I was gone, when in reality I was meeting with a private collector to authenticate a rare painting. He'd question the identity of the courier who dropped off a package, acting as if I was hiding something, when it was merely an appraisal report. He was using the mundane details of my life to create a story of his own design, a story in which I was a villain. I started to notice how his gaze would linger on the camera, a possessive, smug look in his eyes. He had convinced himself he had a complete and accurate picture of my life, a digital fortress of information he could use to control me. I knew I was in for a fight, but I was ready. I had a secret weapon of my own, a hidden agenda that would turn his digital fortress into a house of cards. The game was on, and he was completely unaware that I was playing with a full deck, while he was holding a handful of worthless cards. He was about to learn that he had underestimated me, that the quiet, reserved woman he married was a force to be reckoned with. The stakes were higher than just a marriage. They were for my entire life and my future, and I was ready to play. Update 2. The digital web. Julian's spying intensified, becoming more audacious and overt. The seemingly innocent questions gave way to direct accusations. He was a master of passive aggression, and the subtle jabs had turned into sharp, calculated strikes. He would reference specific times I left the house, not just from the Ring camera, but also from my car's GPS history, which he had secretly been monitoring. "You were out for a full 3 hours this afternoon, Alara," he said one evening, his tone deceptively casual. "That's a long time to be just running errands. Did you have a meeting you forgot to mention?" I knew he was referring to the time I had spent at a private gallery downtown, negotiating the acquisition of a rare piece of art. He was building a pattern of my secret life, a narrative of deception and betrayal that existed only in his mind. He even started questioning the people I was meeting with, referencing the grainy, time-stamped images from the camera. "Who was that man you were talking to on the porch last Tuesday?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "He looked a lot like that art dealer you mentioned once." I would just shrug it off, a forced, tight-lipped smile plastered on my face. The reality was that he was taking my genuine life, my work, my passion, my love for art, and twisting it into a sinister, fabricated story. He was a master manipulator, and he had woven a web of deceit so intricate that it was almost impossible to untangle. I could feel myself being pulled into his world, a twisted reality where my every action was a lie, my every move a betrayal. But I was meticulous, a detail-oriented person by nature. I had been documenting his strange behavior, his subtle hints, his questions, and his smug little smiles. I had a detailed time-stamped journal of his every accusation. I was building my own case, a counter-narrative that would expose his malicious campaign for what it was. I was ready to fight back, to show him that he was not the master of this game. He was about to learn that the trap he thought he had set was actually a cage for himself. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. A war that I was ready to win. He had no idea what he was up against. The game was on. The board was set, and I was ready to make my first move. He was a master manipulator, but he was about to learn that I was a master strategist. Update 3. The digital blackmail. The verbal attacks were just the opening act. A week later, the main event landed in my inbox. A chillingly simple email from a burner account. The subject line, "You're not as clever as you think," was a direct shot across the bow. But it was the content that turned my blood to ice. He hadn't just been compiling data. He had been using it to craft a professional ambush. The email contained a list of my secret contacts: the private collector, the gallery owner in New York, the authentication expert in London. He had cross-referenced Ring camera timestamps with my work calendar and phone records to build a network diagram of my most confidential relationships. "I know about your secret art project," the email read. "I have a detailed dossier on every piece and every person. I can ruin your credibility with a single click. Unless you agree to my terms, the gallery, your clients, and the press will all know the truth about you." The message ended with a link to a file, which I refused to open. He wasn't just trying to control me. He was leveraging my life's work as a weapon. This wasn't a warning. It was a demand for a price I wasn't willing to pay. My fear was instantly replaced by a cold, clear resolve. He had underestimated me, and in his arrogance, he had just handed me a fight I was more than ready to win. The game had just changed from a psychological chess match to a life-or-death battle for my career, my future, and my identity. Update 4. The divorce papers. The email wasn't just a warning, it was the chilling prelude to a public execution. A week later, a process server appeared at my door. A man with a weary expression and a thick manila envelope. The papers were a physical blow, a stark confirmation of the psychological assault that had been building for months. I had been so consumed by Julian's digital threats and the fear of my art project being exposed that I hadn't prepared for this. The document was a formal petition for divorce, but its content was a meticulously crafted lie, a web of accusations woven from his surveillance footage. It wasn't a request for a separation, it was a full-blown declaration of war. He accused me of financial misconduct, claiming I had squandered our joint assets on lavish expenditures. Every late-night Uber ride, every dinner with a colleague, every piece of art I had quietly purchased for my gallery project, all were cited as evidence of my illicit corporate dealings. The papers were filled with grainy, time-stamped photos from the Ring camera, each one a distorted, malicious interpretation of my daily life. He had weaponized our home, turning my independence into a crime. The document even included a request for an astronomical $800,000 settlement, a clear attempt at extortion. It was a vicious, calculated attack on my career and my reputation. The papers made me feel as if my entire life had been a lie, a performance for an audience of one. But as I read the final demand, a cold, clear resolve settled over me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a woman on a quest for justice. He had underestimated me, and in his arrogance, he had just handed me a fight I was more than ready to win. The game was no longer a matter of survival. It was a matter of victory. Update 5. The financial demand. I was now a woman on trial, and the jury had already reached its verdict. The petition for divorce was a detailed, meticulously documented account of my financial misconduct. It wasn't just a request for a fair settlement. It was a demand for a staggering $800,000 in damages. The papers claimed that I had used our joint assets to fund my illicit corporate dealings, citing the late-night Uber rides and the expensive dinners as proof. The document was filled with grainy, time-stamped photos from the Ring camera with his own handwritten captions. He had doctored a few photos of me with a client, adding fake captions and timestamps to make it look like I was a terrible person who had cheated on my company. He had even doctored a few photos of me with my ex-boyfriend, adding fake captions and timestamps to make it look like I was a terrible person who had cheated on my company. This was a clear-cut case of extortion. A man who was willing to ruin my life for the simple pleasure of seeing me suffer. The silence that followed his words was more deafening than any accusation. A vast and terrifying emptiness where my future used to be. The papers were a physical blow, a confirmation of the emotional assault that had been building for months. I had been so preoccupied with the email and the threat of my project being exposed that I hadn't seen this coming. It was a notice for a petition for divorce. But as I read the final demand, a cold, clear resolve settled over me. This was not a request for a separation. It was an act of war. And for the first time, I was ready to fight back, not with emotion, but with a plan. Update 6. The lawyer's warning. I didn't waste another second. I had an appointment with a family law attorney the next morning, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Clara. She had a reputation for being a shark, and I knew I needed someone who would fight for me with everything they had. I laid it all out for her. The Ring camera, the strange behavior, the extortion email, and the divorce papers. She listened patiently, her expression a mix of concern and practiced skepticism. Her words were a validation of my worst fears, but they also gave me a sense of purpose. "This is not a simple case, Alara," she said, her voice a low growl, a professional calm that gave me a flicker of hope. "Your husband has built a very convincing case. He has meticulously documented everything, and he has a way of turning my actions against me. This is a clear-cut case of defamation and digital impersonation. We need to get a restraining order immediately." The words were a validation of my worst fears, but they also gave me a sense of purpose. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a woman on a mission. I wasn't fighting for my reputation anymore. I was fighting for my life. The path forward, for the first time, was clear. Update 7. The big reveal. I knew I couldn't confront him directly. His mastery of deflection and emotional manipulation was something I had witnessed many times before. He was an expert at twisting the narrative, making himself the victim, and me the villain. I had to become a detective to find undeniable proof of his malicious campaign. I went to the police, but they just looked at me with a weary, practiced skepticism. Domestic dispute, ma'am. We can't do anything without a paper trail. I was at a dead end, and I was on the verge of giving up when I remembered a podcast I had listened to months ago about a retired police officer who specialized in cybercrime. He was a forensic investigator who had worked on a few high-profile cases, and he was my only hope. I showed him the screenshots and the timelines I had meticulously kept. He looked at me with a professional intensity, not skepticism. "This isn't just a random act of rage," he said. "This is a targeted cyber-stalking campaign. This man is a digital predator." The words were a lifeline in a storm of deceit. I held on to them, knowing that for the first time, I had a weapon of my own, the truth. Update 8. The counterattack. Clara and I formed a meticulous counterattack, a strategic two-pronged offensive to dismantle Julian's fabricated narrative. While she filed for a restraining order, a legal maneuver to sever Julian's access, I worked with Marcus, a retired cybercrime investigator. His expertise was our secret weapon. Julian had believed his doctored photos from the Ring camera were an airtight case, but he had forgotten the invisible digital ink that exists on every file, the metadata. Marcus pulled up one of Julian's photos and, in a parallel window, the original source file he had retrieved. The difference was stark. The photo, which Julian claimed was taken in late October, had a metadata timestamp of a summer day, nearly 3 years prior. He had taken an old benign photo and retrofitted it to his malicious narrative. Marcus quickly found a pattern of deceit, showing that Julian had used stock photos and old images, photoshopping them to imply my betrayal. Next, Marcus focused on the burner email. Julian had thought he was clever, using a public library computer, an anonymous address designed to be untraceable. But Marcus, like a digital bloodhound, tracked the IP address, traced the Wi-Fi signal, and eventually narrowed it down to a specific public library branch in downtown Denver. He cross-referenced the time the email was sent with the library's computer logs, and there it was, a perfect match. The computer had been logged in under Julian's name, a final, damning piece of evidence that placed him at the scene of the crime. My hope was no longer a flicker, but a steady flame. Julian thought he was a mastermind, but he was just a desperate man with a vendetta, blinded by his own hubris. The game was on, and I was holding a full deck. Update 9, the discovery of the truth. The next piece of the puzzle was almost too simple to be the key that would unlock everything. After the initial victories, Marcus gave me one final piece of advice. Check your social media accounts for any unusual activity. My hands trembled as I opened Instagram. I navigated to the security settings, and there it was. A notification from a month ago. Chillingly simple. Julian has logged into your account from a new device. My blood ran cold, but I immediately changed my password. A small act of reclamation. As I scrolled through my direct messages, the horrifying truth began to unravel. Julian hadn't just been observing me. He had been actively impersonating me to destroy my social and professional life. I found messages he had sent to my closest friends, doctored to make it seem like I was an ungrateful and manipulative person. To my colleagues, he sent thinly veiled insults trying to turn them against me. He had gone to such lengths to isolate me, creating a false narrative of my life so that when the divorce papers came, I would have no one to turn to. But the worst part was the financial sabotage. I found a series of cryptic messages with a burner account from a luxury fashion website. Julian had been using my account to purchase things online, hoping to make it look like I was squandering our money and to bolster his claims of my financial misconduct. In his arrogance, he had made a series of mistakes, creating the very paper trail we needed to expose him. My fear was replaced with a cold, clear resolve. He had underestimated me. The game was on, and I was about to make my final move. Update 10. The courtroom showdown. The day of the hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. The air hummed with a tense energy that was both suffocating and exhilarating. Julian sat across from me, his jaw set in a line of smug confidence, a smirk playing on his lips as if he were simply a spectator at his own triumphant play. But as Clara, my lawyer, began her opening statement, his facade began to crack. Her voice, calm and steady, laid out a timeline of his calculated manipulations. She didn't just present the findings. She wove them into a devastating narrative, showing the court how Julian had used digital surveillance to fabricate a case against me. She projected the evidence onto a large screen for the judge and jury to see. The doctored photos with their falsified timestamps, the location logs that contradicted his story, and the irrefutable trail from the burner email to a specific public library computer. With each piece of evidence, Julian's face turned from smug to ashen. His knuckles grew white as he gripped the table, his eyes darting from the screen to Clara, then to me, a flicker of panic in their depths. The quiet confidence he had once possessed was gone, replaced by a desperate, palpable fear. When Clara finished, the room was silent. The judge, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked directly at Julian. She didn't have to say a word. Her expression spoke volumes. The verdict was delivered with a swift finality. The gavel fell with a thunderous thud that echoed through the room. Julian's case was thrown out, and a temporary restraining order was issued against him, forbidding all contact with me. The financial demand was dismissed, and in a final, stunning act of justice, he was ordered to pay for my legal fees. It was a complete and total victory, a final testament to the power of truth and the resilience of a woman who refused to be broken. Update 11. The aftermath. The gavel's echo faded, but its impact reverberated through every part of Julian's life. The moment the verdict was delivered, his world unraveled. With the legal battle lost, he was left with nothing but the public shame of his own making. The press, which had been so quick to report his fabricated claims, now ran headlines about his lies and deceit. His reputation was in tatters, a self-inflicted wound that would never heal. The art community, a world where integrity is everything, quickly disowned him. His art career, which was his entire identity, was over. In stark contrast, my own life, which he had tried so desperately to destroy, began to flourish. The fear and anxiety that had plagued me for months slowly dissipated. I was no longer a victim. I was a woman who had fought for her life and won. A small, supportive gallery reached out to me, offering a position that was not only professionally fulfilling, but also a sanctuary of trust and respect. My new apartment, a place of my own choosing, was more than just a place to live. It was a physical manifestation of my newfound freedom, a blank canvas where I could rebuild my life, piece by painstaking piece. Julian was still in jail for his other crimes, and I hadn't heard from him. The last I saw of him was his mugshot in the local paper, a chilling and final confirmation of the reality of his actions. The financial and emotional damage he had caused was significant, but I was on the road to recovery. The game was over. I had won, not by being clever or deceitful, but by simply holding on to the truth when everyone else was telling me to give up. Update 12. The rebirth. The legal victory was just the beginning. The courtroom triumph, the public humiliation of Julian, and the dismissal of his absurd claims were all fleeting moments of vindication. The real, enduring work was healing the invisible wounds, the scars left on my psyche by his relentless, insidious surveillance. It was a journey back to myself, a patient rediscovery of the woman he had tried so hard to erase. I began with small, deliberate acts of reclamation. I took long walks in the foothills behind my new apartment, the crisp Colorado air filling my lungs and clearing the suffocating fog of fear that had enveloped me for months. I watched the golden light of the setting sun paint the peaks, the vastness of the sky, a a powerful reminder of how small Julian's world of manipulation truly was. I listened to the rustle of dry leaves and the whisper of the wind, sounds he could never capture on his cameras. Proof that a part of my life would always be off his grid. I found my way back to my passion for painting, not as a professional obligation, but as a form of therapy. I swapped the rigid, analytical precision required for my curatorial work for the raw, expressive freedom of abstract art. The colors I chose were vibrant, uninhibited, deep blues, fiery oranges, and brilliant yellows that mirrored the turbulent, yet ultimately hopeful landscape of my heart. Each brushstroke was a release, a silent protest against his attempts to box me in. I also began to slowly, carefully, rebuild my friendships, reaching out to those I had pushed away during the dark days of my isolation. The conversations were difficult at first, filled with unspoken apologies and the awkward silence of shared trauma. But as I opened up, sharing the full truth of Julian's deception, a wave of support came crashing in. They didn't judge me. They simply hugged me, their presence a powerful antidote to his campaign of loneliness. I was no longer a victim. The quest for justice wasn't just about Julian's conviction. It was about the quiet, daily reclamation of my own soul. It was about finding my way back to a sense of peace that I hadn't known was possible, a peace I had earned, not for myself alone, but for every person he had tried to hurt with his lies. This quiet victory was a testament to the power of truth and resilience. Update 13. The healing from a betrayal so profound is not a linear journey. It's a winding, uneven path filled with unexpected detours. There were still days when the anger would bubble up, a hot, bitter wave that left me shaking. I'd see a happy couple on the street, or a random Ring camera on a neighbor's door, and the rage would flare up, fueled by the injustice of it all. How could he have been so cruel? How could I have been so blind? I would cry until my head ached, consumed by a sadness that threatened to swallow me whole. But with each passing day, the emotional spikes became a little bit less frequent, the valleys a little bit shallower. I learned to sit with the pain, to acknowledge it without letting it define me. The most difficult part of the healing process was forgiving myself. For months, I had been haunted by a single question: what did I do wrong? I replayed every conversation, every decision, searching for the moment I had failed. But the more I looked, the more I realized there was no single moment. I hadn't failed. I had simply trusted someone who was deeply unwell. I began to find solace in my work, in the quiet, meditative moments of a new life. My art was no longer a secret project, but an open book, a form of expression that gave me a new voice. I found a quiet joy in the small, simple moments: a warm cup of coffee in the morning sun, the smell of fresh paint, the silent support of a friend sitting beside me. The quiet victory was a testament to the power of truth and resilience. I had to learn the hard way that a person can be living a life of deceit, and you'd never know until you find one small piece of evidence that unravels the entire story. In my case, it was a simple Instagram notification. I was no longer a victim. I was a woman on a quest for justice. I found justice not for myself, but for the people who had been hurt by his lies. The legal battle is over, and I'm slowly but surely rebuilding my life, piece by painstaking piece. The process has been a series of small, hard-earned victories. I have a new job at a smaller but more supportive company, a place where the culture is built on trust and respect, a stark contrast to the cutthroat environment I left behind. My new apartment feels more like a home, a sanctuary I've created for myself with no ghosts from the past. Julian is still in jail, and I haven't heard from him. The last I saw of him was his mugshot in the local paper, a chilling and final confirmation of the reality of his actions. The financial and emotional damage was done, but I was on the road to recovery. We encourage you to engage with this message and share it with those who need to hear it. Like this video to show your support. Leave a comment below to join the conversation, and share your own experiences or thoughts on overcoming betrayal. Your story matters. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to receive more compelling narratives of justice and personal triumph.